all for being here. There has to be something that's going right with the world if a discussion on women translating women has standing room only. It's something quite unusual, but it's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you for being here. My name is Krupa Ge. I'm from Zubaan Publishers, and today we are here to collaboratively talk on a subject which is really important and which grows out of yet another collaboration. So the first collaboration is between the India International Center, the Ashoka Center for Translation and Zubaan Publishers to come together for this evening. The Ashoka Center for Translation, under the guidance of Rita Kothari and Arunava Sinha, and under the able stewardship of Sanjeev and Nita Gupta, has been working with Zubaan Publishers for a year and a half or perhaps 2 years on a project called Women Translating Women, which is supported very generously by the family of Hindi writer Susham Bedi through the foundation set up by the family, the Susham Bedi Foundation. And Susham is no longer with us, but we are lucky to have her husband Rahul Bedi here. And I'm going to ask him, once I've finished my introductions, to not come up, but stay where you are, Rahul, and just speak for a few minutes about the work that they're doing collaboratively with the Ashoka Center for Translation. The project that we are working on is as I use the word collaboration too often, but it is a collaborative project spread over 2 years, which have actually turned into 3 years, often happens, to translate a series of books, both fiction and non-fiction, from different Indian languages into English. And in the process, work with translators through workshops and capacity building, but also through discussions, and also to try and offer to translators what may be not exactly a fair payment for their work, which is amazing work, but close to, or at least inching towards, a fair payment in a country where translators have traditionally been very, very badly paid, and where that acts against us, all of us in our different languages, getting to see the rich literatures that exist in multiple languages in India. So under this project, we will jointly publish 12 books, 3 of which are here with you today. And although this is not a traditional book launch, I'm going to ask, as soon as I've finished, our speakers and our moderator Rita to open those books and see them. You've also seen them outside. They're on sale at good discounted prices. So if you haven't bought them, please do so after this event ends. And 3 more books will come out in this year before June, and then 6 books will come out in the next year. And they, thank you. They cover many languages, Hindi, Malayalam, Tamil, Sindhi, Marathi, and Urdu, and I don't know what else, others as well, several languages. Today's panel, When Women Translate Women, has 3 of the translators from the series here with us. And the panel is moderated by Rita Kothari. And I'm going to just quickly introduce the translators so that Rita doesn't have to do it. We have Astri Ghosh, who is over there. Astri is half Indian, half Norwegian. She is a teacher, a translator, a writer, a theatre person. She translates into Hindi, into Norwegian, into English, and she's translated a wide range of people, ranging from Ibsen to Tagore to Gandhi, I think. And yes, and her most recent work is a translation into Norwegian, I won't say the title because I can't pronounce it, of Guru Nanak's teachings. And that's pretty amazing. Astri is the translator in this series of Susham Bedi's novel, A New World Romance. We have next to Astri Krupa Ge. Krupa is a writer. She has one work of fiction to her credit, one work of non-fiction. Krupa, what's your fiction? It's called We Know About What We Know About Her. That's right. And her non-fiction work is on rivers, which was inspired by the floods in Chennai. She is currently finishing another work of fiction. She's also a journalist and a translator from Tamil into English. And she has a small baby who is 1 year old, 1.5 years old. And I asked her if her heart was with the baby, and she said, actually, I can't tell you how much I valued the sleep I got on the plane. So that's Krupa. We have, to my right, Ira Pande. Ira is no stranger to people in the literary world in Delhi. She has been a publisher and has worked in every publishing house I can think of except Zubaan. So, Ira, maybe it's time for you to take the feminists on. She's been a translator for the longest time. She translated Susham Joshi's book as the Star Professor. It won the Crossword Award and another award, Sahitya Academy Award, yes. And she has translated her mother Shivani's Aparadhini as Women Without Men, and is currently working for this project on a collection of stories of Sara Rai's, which Ira and Sara are together translating, and that will be something really to look forward to. And Ira is also a writer herself and a journalist and an old friend. Yes. And finally, the moderator of the conversation is Rita Kothari, who is currently professor in the Department of English at Ashoka University. She's also the co-head of the Ashoka Center for Translation. Rita is a writer, a very prolific writer and a translator. So she has done the translation that we will be publishing from Sindhi, which is one of the languages she translates out of, apart from Hindi, Urdu, and Gujarati. And the translation that we will be publishing is a novel called Itihad by Gul Sadarangani. Have I got it right?
Guli Sadarangani.
Guli Sadarangani. I always get it wrong. I'm sorry.
No.
So, always Guli Sadarangani, which we will be publishing, and that will be out somewhere towards the second half of this year. Rita has many books to her credit. I can't list all of them, but I want to tell you about two that are my favorites, using basically my personal preference for it. The first of these is one of her early books, which is on the Sindhi experience of partition, a really moving book called The Burden of Refuge. And the second is her most recent book, unless she's written something between then and now, which I don't know about, but her most recent book called Uneasy Translations, which is a deep, personal, intimate, and very thoroughgoing reflection on the act of translation, and often the gendered act of translation. Now with this, I'll stop my introductions. Could I ask Rahul Bedi to speak a little bit and just tell us about the Susham Bedi Fund for Translation, after which, Rita, if all of you would unwrap your books and hold them up for a photo op, and then you could get started on your discussion.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I hope it works. Hello? Yeah, that's good. Okay, distinguished panelists, writers, authors, translators, creative people, my friends, and the students. I think rarely have I been in a company of such intellectual crowd, so I'm nervous. But I'm hoping that my spirit will kind of give me the fortitude to go through the next 2 minutes without fumbling or faking. All right. So it's with deep emotion and gratitude that I am present here today to attend this event, which is for me and my family is like the fulfillment of a vision. Because when some of you know, some of you may not, But my wife's name was Susham. She was a prolific writer in Hindi language. She wrote poetry, novels, and short stories. But she literally insisted on talking in Hindi, dressing in sari, writing in Hindi, not writing in English. So we used to joke in Columbia University, where she was teaching, she would invariably go in a sari and stuck to that. And sometimes I would say, why don't you write in English? And she said, no, I think and dream in Hindi, so I'll continue with Hindi. That's how it was. So, but the power of translation, what I related this story to some few others. Her first novel was Havan, and then after a few years, it was translated into English language by Heinemann in London. And when that was published, few copies arrived in New York also, and the copies were sold, distributed. But interesting thing what I want to point out, that until then Susham would be getting invitations to panels on Hindi, where it was mostly Indian audience, Indian diaspora, Pakistani Indian diaspora. But after the first translation was published, Fire Sacrifice, within a month, she got an invitation to a panel on which were two famous people, William Stalin and Salman Rushdie. So what I said to her, she was very excited to be on the panel with these two people, because these two people had already reached very, very big heights, and Susham was just starting as a novelist. And she was very excited, and that's the day I remember I said to her, I said, this is the difference of translation. So that is where our whole, at least my thinking was that it's very important, the role of translation is underestimated or not understood fully. So from there, basically, what happened was, my wife passed away in 2020 March, and then we decided that her legacy must live on. So in that context of what we felt that the best way will be to get her work translated, and that's how the project started. So we collaborated with Ashoka University, under which we set up this fund, and we said we will do 6 writers every year into English language. And today is the final day, of the first day of the fruition, when we really feel successful. Rita is smiling, and all the translators are smiling. I am smiling, because it was a whole project. It was, now I think we are solid footing. Now the second part will be easier, but the first part was, how to do this, how to do that. So I really want to thank these people very much. Ashoka University, Zubaan, Urvashi, Rita, thank you very much, Rita. You were the pushing this thing, Anurag Sinha, and says it. I cannot. He was the most helpful in everything, putting in order. And then I also want to thank you, all of you, who have come in the evening to join us this, because this is, I think, I personally, I would say, I'm sure she's smiling wherever she is, but it is wonderful. For our family, this is a fantastic occasion, and it's not only unveiling of a book, but it is our first successful step in the whole vision, what we are trying to do for her work and for other women writers. So in this context, I would say that we absolutely understand the importance of women translating women, because women bring a unique style. They resonate very well with unspoken words, unwritten word, and we are hoping, and we think, we are sure about, and we believe that that will resonate with the readers very well. On that note, I once again thank you all. Thank you very much.
competition to see who does it first. But we did a hard one. Yes. Ira Pande. खड़ी हो जाओ ना खड़ी हो जाए हाँ उसको खोलने दो yeah that's what yeah got it guys okay should we stand up oh
Thank you. Over to you, Rita.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. There's so much that's right about this evening, so much which has sort of come together that I don't even know where to begin. But I want to first begin by very, very sincerely thanking all of you for coming here. And I also want to say sorry to students for making you sit here on the floor, asking you sometimes to vacate your chairs. But I hope you understand that sometimes booking a very large room can be quite embarrassing. And booking just slightly large but not like very small either is good, because as Krupa said, this is a good problem to have. So thank you so much all of you for turning up today. It means a lot to us. This journey that Rahul Bedi already mentioned to you actually began 2 years or maybe more than 2 years ago. And we were requested by the Bedi family if we would undertake the translation of Susham's work. And that conversation kind of led us to think that Susham is a very important diasporic writer, but we also thought it was important to locate Susham in a community of other women writers. We felt that, we said to the family that while we understand that you want to memorialize Susham's work, there are many women writers who have not had this opportunity. So do you mind if we think of this as a community of women writers than just one writer? And that will give us an opportunity to kind of bring women writers that have hitherto not been translated or scarcely translated. And we also felt that we wanted the entire thing to be translated by women themselves. Now, as to why we call this women translating women or when women translate women, I will come to that in a little bit. The graciousness of the family was such that they immediately saw that there was something to this. There was a larger principle or ethic involved in this question. And they gave us, this was the first fund the Ashoka Center for Translation received when we had just begun. And the family actually managed to trust us at a time when they had no reason, we were just about beginning. So considering that trust, considering what happened that day, and from there we have come to this point, it is a very big milestone. But what also made it a very big milestone was the fact that we were with the best publishing house, that this collaboration was happening with a feminist press, and a feminist press that has impeccable reputation and standards. So we are also delighted about the fact that that has also sort of come together. And then what also gives us pleasure is that, for instance, one novel is by Susham, which Astri has translated. Krupa has translated something from Tamil of a writer that we have not read before. We have with us a very seasoned, accomplished translator like Ira Pande to my left. So it's also a combination of very seasoned and very interesting new emerging translators and very different languages that are already evident in this panel. So this is a very special moment for us, and I want to begin by actually addressing this particular question, which is the title of the panel, When Women Translate Women. Now, if we were not to think of binaries of men and women, if we were to think of the category of women somewhat provisionally, and whether I say femme-presenting people or I say women, the point that we were trying to make here is that sometimes there are two things that happen. There is a certain kind of kinship that women have with other women. Not all of them, not all the time, but when that happens, it can be really quite amazing. And when that happens, very often, as Rahul already mentioned earlier, it is women also manage to hear so much that is not said, so much that is unspoken. During years of field work that I have been doing, whether to work on, the Sindhi partition book or the Kutch book and so forth, very often when I would actually meet women in the small villages of Kutch or refugee women who came during partition, I would notice that there were other things at work here, and it took me many years to be able to understand what exactly was happening. For instance, women would talk about themselves, hardly themselves actually, but use, for instance, very often a collective pronoun. They would say, हाँ साके चाहो हेडे वनो, like हमको कहा गया कि आप यहाँ जाइए, इस गाड़ी में बैठिए, और फिर हम बैठ गए. The men would talk about the logistical details of leaving Lahore or leaving Karachi. The women would talk about following the instructions and using hum or we and so on. And then sometimes if you pushed further and you said, okay, what else happened when you arrived in India, you would find that the women actually picked on some of the other qualities that the men were not talking about. Like small things. For instance, when Farah Bashir talks of Kashmir, she talks about the way ghar ka anaj change ho gaya tha. That in the kitchen, some of the grains had changed. Some of the things the families used to buy once disruptions began in Kashmir, those things were not available. So sometimes there is a kind of a vividness to some of the details that women talk about. And if you are a woman ethnographer, and ethnographers are also translators, then you are sometimes picking up something that has not been said to you directly. I remember a woman in Kutch who was very accomplished as an embroiderer, and she received many awards. She received the President's Award, and she's hardly ever left that village. And when I asked her that when you went to Delhi to receive the award, did you stay back a little bit to see the city? And she said to me in Sindhi, no, asan ke khaso na lage, which in Kutchi Sindhi means, ye hum pe nahi suhata, it doesn't look good on us, but it also means we don't like it. Right? And I went away with that ambiguity, not thinking whether she was being agential and said I didn't want to be gallivanting about when I went to Delhi, or saying that if I had done that, it wouldn't have looked very good. The language was clearly gendered, and language is seldom not gendered, right? So I want us to think of female kinship. I also want us to think of gendered language. For instance, a recent book which talks about mother tongue, she says, does the first syllable of woman come from womb or from another root? Is a maiden always a virgin? Is a maiden always a girl? What do spinsters have to do with spinning? How can rape and rapture derive from the same etymological origins? Right? So there is a lot to be said about not only roots of words, but how gendered language is. Right? But there is also something to be said about how women's work has been translated. A very famous article by Toril Moy, While We Wait, talks about the translation of the second sex, which had been done by men, a much whittled down version, a much more flattened down version. And sometimes you would find, even in the Indian context, for instance, whether it is a Meera or Andal, you will find that some of the male translators have flattened out, some of the more sexual bits, and sometimes made, sort of foregrounded the devotional or the bhakti element so much that some of the more sensuous, some of the more kind of robust elements get, and that also happens out of a certain kind of caste respectability, not only a patriarchal desire that gets projected onto women. So there are many questions involved here, but I also want to repeat the qualification I made at the beginning, saying that we are not here talking of some binary here of men and women, but we are talking here about translators who will have have the nimbleness to be able to read between lines and to be able to see, okay, what is at work here? What are these desires about? And so with this at the back of our minds, I want to begin asking some questions to our translators here. And Ira, if you don't mind, I'm going to begin with you because you had a very, very long tenure as a writer, translator, and also as somebody who has sort of observed your mother's writerly life very closely and documented. You translated Manohar Shyam Joshi, but you also translated Prabha Khaitan's autobiography. You're now translating Sara Rai. In these various encounters that you have had with both men writers, women writers, how have you seen your role, and what are some of your observations out of that intimacy, that experience?
Thank you, Rita. Let me begin by a short introduction to the work that led me to translation, which is when my mother passed away in 2003. I suddenly realized that I had not honored her enough while she was alive. And so I began, just as an exercise of, homage, or tribute, to translate some of the stories which were very dear to me when she was around. And I remembered the background of those stories, the time when they were written, from the early 60s down, actually late 50s on. When I was translating those stories, it occurred to me that, there is a story behind. She's a character in her own world, and that translation is a way of my understanding a persona which was very complex, which we only saw as a unidimensional figure of a mother. I was also aware of certain difficulties which she had, which she never spoke about, which she has left like a crossword puzzle for us to see and solve. So that's how I started, and I was talking to my husband. I said, how do I? He said, why don't you write about your mother as a character in her own world? And that's what really guided me towards, seeking a voice that I could hear. That's why the title of the book is Diddi, My Mother's Voice, because translation is, to me at least, a way of discovering a voice and then not allowing that voice to fade away and become your voice. That is the biggest challenge, I think, that many translators, because you have to remember, it's like bringing up somebody's child who's an adopted child. You've adopted that child, but that child is not yours. The genetic structure, the biological genes come from another mother. And so you have to keep that distance between the biological mother and the adopted mother. And that's what has always guided me, is that if the book doesn't speak to me, if it doesn't come, if that voice is not something that I hear, and here it is not just, even with Manohar Shyam Joshi, who is a polyphonic mind and a polyglot in many ways, and who speaks at several registers. When I did Tata Professor, what drew me to him was, one, it is a brilliant book, and two, that it came from Kumaon, with characters from Kumaon, a small village in Kumaon, which is what I, relate to in a very special way, because I think we are the last of the Kumaoni speakers in our family. So it helps if you have many sounds in your ear and you are able to bring those sounds out, the music of those sounds, the relationships that those sounds. The other thing which struck me was that because we come from an oral tradition, our stories were basically told as kathas, as stories. So there's a lot of onomatopoeia, there is, all your senses are alive. So you can smell the food, the chalk, the sound of the school bell, the ghanta, thap 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 hawa chalti hai, dham 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 koi niche seedhi se aata hai. How do you get these sounds into a language which is very flat and linear? That is an enormous challenge which I've always struggled with. And you have to devise ways of bringing that out without it becoming clunky. Now, what happened with the early translators, the generation that, let's say, started when after independence, was that a lot of those translations were done by people who were not good editors. You have to be a good editor because most writing, at least in Hindi, is very discursive and elaborate and repetitive. So you have to be able to clip that into a language which is very functional and very different, English. Then how do you translate aap, tum, tu into a flat you? Because those relationships are embedded in the language that we speak. So if you're talking to somebody older whom you respect, you can't say tu kahan ja raha hai, where are you going? That sounds completely wrong. Aap kahan ja rahe hain is the way that good Hindi speakers will, you can't say aap kahan ja rahe ho, that the Punjabi Hindi that we have now got accustomed to. So if you have all those sounds in your ear, and if you are blessed to grow up in a house where, language was very important to everyone in my house, my mother, of course, my aunt, my cousins, my sister, and we picked up so many languages without realizing how we had. So we went to English medium schools, I went to a convent, but we were Hindi medium at home. We never spoke in English to each other. And in fact, you were sort of made fun of if you tried to swan around in English and whatever. Secretly, of course, the family was proud that we could all speak good English. But so we spoke 3 languages in the same house. So Hindi was for our neighbors who didn't speak Kumaoni. English was for our school and teachers and whatever. And Kumaoni is the intimate language within the house. And these 3 categories were roughly the sounds that I have accumulated in my ear. Then when we came to Lucknow, I picked up Awadhi because the people who worked for us spoke such a sweet Awadhi that that sweetness is something which I treasure. Then we came to Allahabad, I picked up Purabiya. There were a lot of Pravasi Bengalis in Allahabad in the 60s. Also, my mother was a fluent Bangla speaker. Then I got married and we went to Punjab. So when I went to Punjab, I realized, oh, Bapre, this is something that is completely alien. Those sounds were different. The manner of speaking was different. It was a very rough but you realize then that there was a deep sweetness in that and a kind of honesty in that language which you hid behind all these very courtly ways of speaking when we were speaking other languages. So I always feel that the more languages that you know, the more sensitive you become about translations and voices. I've translated a number of people, apart from my mother, of course. My mother's work is central to my translation work and I still go back to it a lot. But for instance, I told you about Manohar Shyam Joshi, who is an incredibly brilliant man and who his vision is that of a screenplay. He wrote Bunyad and Hum Log and he was, when he writes, it's with his senses on all sides open to gestures, to speech, to action, in a way that many others do. Then I did Prabha Khairdan, which somebody I don't know at all. The book came to me and Urvashi is the publisher. It is one of the most, when I got it, I thought I'd just politely refuse and tell the person who had sent, her nephew who had sent it to me to say, I'm sorry, I'm very busy or whatever. मैंने पढ़ना जब उसको शुरू किया, I realized that इतनी honest और upfront autobiography मैंने और किसी औरत की नहीं देखी है in English, in Hindi. She had a long-term relationship with a married man. She came from a very orthodox Marwari family. The Khaitans were as orthodox as you can imagine. She moved in with this man who refused to divorce his wife and had 3 children, so they lived in a kind of menage a trois. And then she went abroad. She became a very successful. She writes somewhere in that book that I realized for the Marwari community, respect is related to money. So she said if I became very rich, I knew that shut them up, and that's what she did. She set up a huge industry of, she began with beauty salons and spas and so on, then went into leather. That entire book is also got the background of the Nakshal movement, which destroyed so many Marwari businesses in Calcutta. It worked at so many levels that I was fascinated by what she was saying and doing. And I enjoyed that very much. So it's not just that I listen to my mother's voice, which I'm trying to recreate every time, but there are others. Now, Sarah is, anyone who's read her Unmoored, is one of the most gifted writers that I know of her generation. And she's very different. So if Prabha Khetan was in your face, Sarah is a very quiet observer, very lonely child in a huge house in Allahabad. And she observes people and somehow manages to pull you into another dimension. The one story which is called Atakama, which she has, is about that all of us who grew up in large houses with lonely childhoods, nothing to do on summer afternoons. She's lying on her bed and she's watching a spider walk up a wall. Now there's nothing that can be more boring than that, spending about 2 hours watching a spider walk along a crack in the wall. But the way that she has just made a story of it is what drew me to that whole thing. So there's always something that you find. If it's not a voice, it is the power of observation. It's the capacity to relate to. The other thing which I want to say is, yeah, sure, okay.
I'll come back to you, Ira, in a minute. Astri, you've had huge experience, right, of translating very divergent text with very divergent, also as a child that was growing up with these, not only two languages, two different sort of racial experiences. I was interested in knowing whether you think your role or your identity as a translator began before it began. You know what I mean? And I'm very interested in knowing from you how, for instance, what do you find special about Susham? If you can sort of help us also locate her somewhat in the diasporic context, in the kinds of questions she's asking. So if you could speak maybe for 3-4 minutes, leaving time for Krupa also. Thanks.
Just press that, please. Yeah. So I grew up in Delhi, and I had a Bengali father who was originally from near Dhaka, and a Norwegian mother, and they married in Burma, and my mother had worked in India and Pakistan, and so my family then moved to Delhi, and I grew up and went to Sangeeta Bandyopadhyay, which is like across just here. And I went to a Hindi medium school because my parents felt that if there were immigrants in Delhi, then their children should know the local language. So we had Hindi in school, and we spoke English at home, and my mother spoke Norwegian, my father spoke Bengali. So that some people think that you should have one good mother tongue, and know it properly, and then you have sort of access to other languages. But I was never given that option because I had 4 languages in my. And for me, that whole thing about always having to negotiate Western culture, Indian culture, explain one culture to other people, that we were translating all the time, and we were exposed to other cultures as well. So, for instance, in Delhi, the Christian community speaks Urdu, used to speak Urdu, and so we, on Sundays when we went to church, then Urdu was spoken there. So that closeness to Urdu also came about, and so I just felt, I feel that Delhi is a language, is a city of many languages. Street signs are in 4 languages, and that is actually our reality as well, that we go from one language to the other. And to translate then was natural, and it just came about. Now, Susham Bedi, I feel a connection with also because she writes about diaspora lives, and I have both studied, she studied Hindi and Indian culture, and I have studied in Norway, and I've studied Sanskrit and Hindi and Urdu in Norway as well, and taught it. And so for me, the life that she described of academics in the US, I have friends who also have been teaching Hindi, American friends and Indian friends. So the world that she describes of two Indian academics who are from who have moved to the States and who are not in, I mean, they're not young, they're in their 40s in the meat, and she describes the life of people who have left their culture and who have it in them, been uprooted like a tree, and they've been brought to another culture. And what do they take with them, and what do they get rid of their values, and what do they अपनाते क्या हैं, you know, of values. That discussion is something that those of us who are sort of diaspora Indians, we are very familiar with. And I think her books are important because there are so many people whose families, I mean, there's so many families where people have gone abroad, and where those who are left behind, for them to have some sort of access to the lives of their family members who've gone abroad. Reading Susham Bedi's is, you know, very good, a good way of getting access to that, to understand that life.
Yeah, I'll come back to you again with more specific questions. Krupa, I was interested in hearing from you the spectrum, you know, the various positions you occupy along this gender spectrum, writing a novel about very powerful women characters, and then translating this novel, which has some really, really feisty, very interesting women. And I was interested in how did you actually find out about Ramachandran Usha's novel, and how did you come to it, if you could talk about it?
Yeah, thank you, Rita. This is actually a pretty interesting story because the writer and I used to live in the same building when he was very young, and then she moved to the Gulf, and then I found out from some friends that she'd written a novel, and I'd been wanting to read it, and it so happened that she relocated back to Chennai, and I sort of, her daughter and I were in fact in touch first, and then I asked her to put me in touch with her mother, and then I wanted to read this book because there was another writer from the same building in which I grew up, and then that writer's book was out in the world, and I just had to read it. And when I read Usha's novel, I was actually pretty surprised because you grow up in a kind of place, and then you have a particular stereotype of the aunties of that building, and in my head, she's just the auntie who used to give me biscuits in the evening, and so then she goes ahead and then she blows me away like this with this book. And when I had to translate a book that hadn't been translated, it was pretty easy for me to, because there were a lot of things in the book that I mean, this is not a book that I would ever write, or these are not women that I would ever write. Because when I wrote my novel, I found it very interesting what Ira said about honoring her mother, because when I started to write, it was also some form of honoring, my grandmother and the stories I heard from her, and I sort of looked at writing as something that is just sort of stories that have been passed on to me, because my mother was a pretty good storyteller, and she brought me up with stories about her family, and I felt like, I felt this compulsion to write the novel. And because it was my mother who was telling me these stories, she had access to the private lives of the other women in the family, and I felt like I was suddenly the keeper of all these secrets, and they had to spill out somewhere. And mothers, as soon as daughters grow up, mothers are suddenly like friendly with gossip, and so I felt like my it's going to burst out if I would put all of that down somewhere. But with Usha's women, Usha is also a keeper of these stories in the sense that she's also collected them from the women she met in the Gulf. And she's very, upfront also about it, that they're an amalgamation of the women she met, working class women and women who had gotten married and gone to the Gulf. And it's a lot of the stories that she would read in the newspaper about these women who had gone there and the kind of problems that it suddenly cropped up. And so the one thing that I felt like that was sort of interesting to me was the hypervigilance that I found in all of her characters, which is something that I could relate to. And that you asked me earlier about if I found this work to be a woman's work in any manner, and I think women are aware of other women being hypervigilant as well. It's not just that we are hypervigilant, but we know when somebody else is also not feeling safe, when they're also feeling threatened. And each of these characters felt threatened, or the sense of power leaving them, or the sense of control leaving them. And I think among all of the fears that have been drilled into us, that is sort of a primal fear, right, of us being powerless in some space. Oh my God, what can they do to us? So that's sort of what I related to the most.
Yeah. I also find it interesting, Krupa, that in Unmoored, you've got women you've got a Muslim woman, then you've got a Hindu woman, right? And all they know is to kind of watch out for each other, to be there for each other. And I was thinking whether this is peculiar to Tamil in the sense that in a way that I might not see that in Gujarati, for instance. That's one literary sphere I work with. And I was reminded of a story I translated for a collection that Urvashi has produced, Speech and Silence. And there's a story called Nightmare of a woman, like an upper caste woman, who's working in some office, going back to her city, traveling by train, and she sees a burqa-clad woman come and sit opposite her, and she thinks that, oh my God, I'm alone here, and the riots have just happened, the curfew has just been lifted, and there are all kinds of things that go through her mind, but she also chides herself, reminding herself, I should be thinking like this. This is not the way to think. And then when there's some station and the train pulls in, this other woman comes and wakes her up and she says, my station is here, I'm going, thank God you were there, I was feeling so scared. And it's an amazing story of how what actually binds us quite often is this dread, right? But when does the dread of the other and when does the threat from the other, when do they collapse with each other? And what is it about women's bodies that regardless of which religion, they continue to be vulnerable, and yet the narrator is an upper caste, so-called, Gujarati woman who's grown with certain stereotypes as we have. So there is a lot that happens, and I found it quite interesting that the novel you translate is so unusual in the kind of women that it brings together. If there is time, maybe I might ask you to read something out. Astri, I'm coming back to you now, and I'm interested in, I think Susham is doing something with literary forms. Like she's telling you whether this is a romantic story, it is and it is not. And we're not going to tell you whether it has fulfillment at the end. तो ये रस कथा है कि ये रोमांटिक स्टोरी है, क्या चीज है, क्या कर रही है सुषम बेदी उसमें, if you could speak.
Susham Bedi, I think, she's, the whole thing about being a diaspora writer also is that when you're in another culture and you have their traditions and then you think about your own. So she's doing that, she's thinking about Indian literary theories, and she's thinking about what makes a hero in what would Bharata say, or what the different acharyas and munis say about what a hero is. And then you have that going on at the same time as the story of the people who are in the New World or in Navakhun. So the whole book is full of, you know, thoughts about Indian, you know, lesson theory, Indian, but also about, you know, Indian literary thought.
I have to say, you have to give more luscious details so that people buy the book. Yeah, I think we have to get better at giving teasers. So if you could just kind of read out a little bit, okay?
Sorry.
दूसरी बार डांट लगा दी.
बिल्कुल सुबह सुबह So this she talks about as you might know, in any love story, the hero sets off in pursuit of the heroine the minute the seed of love starts sprouting, and he makes all kinds of efforts to get her. That is why, when listing the characteristics of a story, the Sanskrit critic Acharya Kama says that the theme of a story is Kanyaharan, that is the acquisition of the heroine or beloved, war and separation. What I mean is that acquiring the girl does not happen by itself. To get her, every hero has to struggle and fight. It's in this struggle that the story emerges. If there is no battle, there is no story. So let's not see how much truth there is in what the critic says. It's not that I doubt the excellent Acharya's words, but our hero does not look like a brave warrior. What if I were to fail the Sanskrit critic's test and be deprived of the privilege of storytelling? He will have to fight some battle, or else I'll have to find another way. Let's now consider this hero's situation. As far as the seed of love goes, he has no feelings about that. He wished to get to know Ketki better. He wanted to meet her frequently, and this was all he understood. Nothing more than that. So when he felt the blood in his veins rushing several times faster than usual, he did not think about fighting. He only thought his nervous system was malfunctioning and that he needed to speak to a specialist. And the question of a battle does not arise because the heroine is not anybody's possession or charge. She's like a waterfall that cascades freely without any hindrances. Nor is she in hiding, requiring one to go in search of her. It's only a matter of lifting the receiver and dialing her number.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What would you like to do next?
This is a part of the book which is also part of the feminist storytelling tradition, in which nothing is actually moving forward in this story. The woman's movement itself, the fact that she's pausing and loitering, is the point of this part of the story. So I thought I should let you guys in on that. The two women left Aisha's home and made their way to the temple, crossing many bungalows and new apartment buildings on the way. Hindu liked that there were many trees along the streets. I can't quite believe this is Chennai. Looks like Bangalore, no? I didn't even know this neighborhood. She breathed in the scent of trees bursting with flowers. Of course, ma, once you've lived here, you won't like living anywhere else. See, behind Saidapet Court, there's only one road that goes in and out. On this side is Annapuriyal College. On that side is the Arya River. Behind us is Kotrapuram. But you can't go to any of these places. There's a large wall that separates us from them. There's not much crime here, but we get too many monkeys from the college. Indu couldn't help but smile when she heard Jamila say poriyal, stir-fried vegetables, instead of the Tamil word for engineering, poriyal. Looking around, she asked, monkeys for real in this city? You can't see them after dark, but early in the morning they'll begin their attack on everything, Jamila said. There's even a hillock here. A hillock too? Yes, Little Mount. That's the name of the bus stop as well. You see these two streets, the hillock is behind them, probably as tall as a 3 or 4 story building. There's a church at the top. Neighborhood has a lot of Christians. Take me there one day, Jamilama, Hindu said, and then asked, what is that scent? It's such a striking fragrance. She looked up at the tall, handsome tree in front of them. This tree's flower, wait, what's it called? Your people use it as an offering to God, Jamila said, and asked the man standing inside the compound wall to pick up a flower and give it to her. some petals had fallen off, but when she opened the flower that it closed in on itself, she said, "This is Nagalingam. Look, it looks like a lingam."
Okay, very good, thank you. Ira, I interrupted you, but I want to come back to you and you can have the last word. On a question, you actually began quite beautifully by talking about this voice, your mother's voice in your head. And then you were talking about Sarah, and at that point I interrupted you. I wanted to ask you, Sarah has a lot of reticence, right? There's a lot of, what shall I say, a lot of economy, a lot of reticence in the way she writes. So how do you think of that voice? A voice that is like so muted.
You know, Sarah is like an iceberg. There's 1/3 of her that you can see, but 2/3 is buried under what she's writing. And to track that voice and to get it out without disturbing the silence that she wants to keep around her. That is a challenge, and it doesn't help that she's a first-rate translator herself. So there's one story in that which is about this. It's based actually on an incident that happened in Bombay when these boys were stalking a girl. They raped her, killed her, left her, and this boy, the story, the hero of this boy, he runs away from there and comes back to Allahabad where his old mother lives. But he can't stay with her because the police will come looking for him. So it's layered at so many levels that when I try, and there's a lot of Bombaya Hindi in that, which is very difficult to translate into English. So I told Sarah, I said, this one I think we'll leave out. She said, let me try. She's done such a superb translation of that story, I can't tell you. Then there are these other stories, apart from the one that I spoke about, the Atakama, where she's actually watching a spider, and you enter that space of silence with her. I don't know how she does it. She's incredibly gifted with how little she writes, and her short stories are truly short. They're a page and a half or something like that. There's one story called Nabila, which is about this little girl whose father, they are refugees from Bangladesh. Her father lives near the river and they cultivate watermelons. And this little girl has no other family apart from the father. The mother was killed, raped, something, and they were running away. So she's been left by the father at a neighbor's, Sarah's neighbor's house. I don't know how much of it is true and how much of it is something that's Sarah. But the man there is, he has sexually abused that child. I mean, whether he's actually done it or he's just groped her or whatever, how she manages to bring out the suffocation of that relationship and of the lies that children make up. So when Nabila comes to play with her, she said, when we were running away from Bangladesh, our whole house was made of gold, even the gate was made of gold. I had 37 silk frocks and she wears purani kapde which are hand-me-downs from somewhere. And these children believe whatever she does because she's such a terrific guppi. Now, to enter somebody else's mind like that and to bring out the difference between these children who are very secure in large homes with loving parents and money, and to be at one stage, children have a relationship which is entirely different. So Sarah is incredibly gifted, and she and I work so well together that Urvashi, when she said, when we were doing the contract, she said how she'd be doing. I said, Sarah, you decide which story is yours and which is mine. I've forgotten because we did it in a collaboration. That is how you vibe with each other. So Sarah is, I'm hoping that book will really do well because she deserves that honor. But I just want to end with one last bit, which is that, in my mother's work, you see a completely different age and a different set of characters. There's this book which I like very much, and which Kartika, if she's here.
She's here.
Where is she? I owe Kartika big time for this. because Kartika was my editor for this book. It's called Apradhini, and this is a series of articles which she wrote for Dhanmyog after she went to visit jailed women in Lucknow. The warden of that jail, the women's jail, was a great fan of my mother. So she said, Shivani ji, please आप यहाँ आइए, आपको यहाँ बहुत कहानियाँ मिलेंगी. And it was published as Jare Ekaki, I think 7 or 8 or 10 maybe. Brilliant stories of these women who've been just forgotten by their families and thrown into prison. They have, as one of them says, मैं 2 साल में मैं यहाँ से बरी हो जाऊँगी. मैं कहाँ जाऊँगी? ये मेरा मायका भी है, मेरा ससुराल भी यही है. She has no home left. And my mother said, this girl is a Pahadi. So my mother said, Acha, tell me, what is your village? If I go to Unmoored, you said it's very close, I'll go to your house. And she said, I swore that she had killed somebody. She said, I swore that I would never dishonor my father or that village by taking its name. But I can describe to you, Didi, where I live. My father wears a black coat and sural, chudidar kind of thing. And she said he wears glasses, but one eyepiece is missing, one this thing is missing. So there's a loop which he loops over 1 year. Toota chashma hai. My house has 3 apple trees in front and 1 walnut tree at the back. And there's a lane that comes straight from the Shiva temple to my courtyard. You know, the entire geography is so deeply imprinted in her mind. It's one of the most moving stories, and it's a true story. So, you know, to do that and come from that kind of collection of women who've been forgotten by their families, and we put it together as a book called Women Without Men. That lot of characters is very dear to me, and then the next lot is Sarah's book, which is also something really worth waiting for.
Thank you so much, Ira. We have time for some questions. Aditya, yes, go on, Aditya.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for the very, very lovely talk. I hope, can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Can you get up and stand near a mic?
Yeah, I can stand up and speak.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the very lovely talk. I've actually been thinking about a common theme in everyone's speech about translation here, and all of you sort of spoke about mothers. While Ira ji quite literally, Astri ji spoke about the mother tongue, and Krupa ji spoke about an auntie who lives in your colony. And I was very interested in thinking about the position of the translator herself. In that case, if you're thinking about the mother figure as the writer we're translating or the language we're dealing with, is the translator, especially the translator of a woman writer and a woman translator, a daughter? Is the condition of a woman translator the condition of a daughter? And a daughter is supposed to honor the mother in a certain way, in a certain intergenerational way, but I'm sure that a daughter's feminism is very, very different from her mother's feminism, and at times at odds with it. And so what are the fights you had with your writers, mother tongues, or even figures of mothers in your, what fights did you have with their feminism while you were translating these books? And do you think that it even applies that the condition of a translator would be a condition of a daughter?
Who would like to respond? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I think I've never thought about it as a daughter fighting with a mother, but I do think that when one translates an author, you get upset. You know, you're sort of tearing your hair out, and you're thinking, you know, that if she feels this, how could she say something like that? So I certainly felt that with this book. I would speak to Rita, I would speak to Rita. One does that. One, if you really get into translating a novel, you struggle with some things you really agree with, and some things you don't agree with. And but you have to do. I mean, you've got to overcome that, and then you've got to do the best you can. Like when you fight with your mother as well.
Yeah, I mean, Aditya, your question is quite profound actually. It does require a fair amount of thinking because there are also mothers that will not tell their stories, right? My mother would much rather seek refuge in her guru than talk about what she thinks is a previous avatar.
Yeah.
You know, she very much like those nuns of Theri Gatha who say, I'm done with this husband, this mortar, pestle, sorry, I'm only going this way. So I think it does require a fair amount of thinking to respond to that. There was another question?
No. I just want to bring a very happy revelation here. I think it was Astri Ghosh. She's been a fantastic actress as a dementia patient in a film with Tom Alter called Life Flows On. And it's a 2.5-hour feature film by Vishal Nityanand, and she was fabulous. So maybe that's another talent that she has. She was fantastic.
Thank you. And that was a tribute to my mother because my mother had dementia and Alzheimer's.
I believe so.
And so.
Well, let me also mention that Ira Pande acted in Monsoon Wedding. Yeah. Okay, any other question, please? Sanjit, how much time have we got? No, I can't function without Sanjit, I'm sorry. Where is he? We do? Yeah, okay, thank you. That's fine, Sakshi. Yes, Rekha?
Not a question, just an observation. First of all, I would like to congratulate Astri for her beautiful translation of the book. And I remember having read it in original. And I think in original it was published in 2002. And in 2003, a famous film was released, Koi Mil Gaya. So it has a love story on multiple planes, and at that time Susham Ji is also thinking about what would be a love story in the age of technology, in another world.
Yeah.
So I remember when I saw that film with this book kind of resonated with me, and when I read it in 2002 itself, so I said, "Ye kya kahani hai?" So, why is she talking about that level? Because having read Havan and other of her novels, even The Lotna and other ones. So I think in the beautiful translation, she has brought out all these multiple planes of a love story and also a revelation in search of self.
Right.
So all these aspects are covered in the novel, and they have come out beautifully in the translation.
I was also thinking I've never seen an Aditya. I've gone to so many conferences in my life. You know how Kirti finds Aditya. Yeah. Yes, please, go ahead.
First of all, I'd just like to say that this was a very lovely session to attend. My question.
Yes, you.
So I think my question kind of was born out of Ira Pande's initial conversation about the intricacies of language, right? Because English is a very flat language to speak in. And I kind of wanted to understand from your perspective just the technicalities of trying to capture this voice in a language that may not allow for it. And another addition to that is obviously, you're translating stories about women at various different ages, right? There are young girls, there are those in their teen years. And I kind of wanted to get your perspective on how it feels like to embody these young women, like these women who may not be in the stage of life that you are in now while you're translating. Like, can you feel, some sense of camaraderie while you're writing about this young girl, and just that perspective of one woman to another, one child to another, and the histories that may overlap as you're working.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I belong to a generation which is completely out of sync with how young people talk and loud born hate or whatever it is. So I'm perhaps not the person to speak on this. But I want to say that when I look to translate something, I'm not looking only for women characters. I mean, I believe that women have a level of emotional intelligence and perspicacity which men lack. They truly, there's a manufacturing defect, I have to say. You know, I enjoy doing Manohar Shamjoshi so much because there are multiple voices there as well. And very few women characters there. It's mostly male characters. And so I wanted to challenge myself and say I don't want to only listen to my mother's voice or to, you know, women writers as such. I think that women are equally empowered and gifted when they translate male voices. What attracts me to a book that I would like to translate is the challenge of speaking in one language and thinking in another. It's like doing Bharatanatyam on a tightrope. Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. So, sorry, what was the beginning part? Inhabiting these other voices, these younger voices. I'm young myself. So. But just the camaraderie that you were talking about, that is something that I was able to, in Usha's book especially, the voice, the narrative voice is in itself very sort of inside the mind of the characters, very stream of consciousness sort of events. And also, the book is fashioned in such a way that it doesn't follow your usual arc, the narrative arc. So as the women move, the story moves with them. So they go from one place to another, and just the travel is sort of, they're bobbing along. In Tamil, the novel is actually called Karai Thedum Odangal, which means vessels or ships in search of a shore. And so literally you can feel that movement of these characters, even in the bit that I read, they're just walking from one place to another. And so for me, that was actually really thrilling. These are people who have their life in their hands and they're taking it and they're just walking with it. And so that was the most interesting part of how this woman author handled her women subjects. And this is something that I hadn't done. I'm always thinking of plotting and writing and grand themes, how I'll change the world.
Yes, you had.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been such a wonderful evening listening to such enlightened souls and on a subject which is so profoundly revealing our humanity. I wanted to ask the question, you must be now all quite familiar with the tools that are available, the artificial intelligence, how do we take over the ChatGPT, and then the improvements that are being made in the field of translation through the help of technology. But yet, English has been a language so vast. It's of course described as a mongrel breed because it has taken from everyone, everywhere. So how are these new tools? Because when I do some translation from English to Hindi, I do take help of the Shabda Ghosh and the Google. Then I see where things are missed out and how you can bring in the style and the syntax and etymology and the phonetics aspect. So I wanted to know if you have had any experience of using these technological tools, and these are only going to improve and make things better, because now I know some institutions have customized with the help of these technological tools to make translation tasks very easy. And we just recently heard of the Japanese technology that gives you instant translation. What is your experience as
Can I just listen to a couple of other questions and then we can respond together because we are running out of, where were you pointing? Over
Those three
Yes,
people
please.
have been raising their
So sorry.
So I've been asked to say for those people who are leaving, please go buy the book sales before you leave.
Yeah, yes, please.
I'm going to look over here but talk over there. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit off of the question about translating across age by saying also that, and maybe this is vaguely connected to the AI question, but we're also often translating across caste or class, and
I think that I understand that English is a simple language, but I also don't think that it's actually, or it's a flat language, but it's not a simple language. And I think there's many different kinds of Englishes, just like there's many different kinds of Tamils and Hindis and everything. And I think the question I would put to you is, when you're taking on a translation project, how much of a challenge are the axes of, say, class and caste and also perhaps background, religion, all of these things, as much as gender when it comes to translation? And yeah, I wanted to say something in defense of English, but maybe that's just because I'm from South Delhi.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take a couple more questions and we'll see which of us can respond.
So, a trope that gets talked a lot about, particularly translating women authors or women writers, is the practice of meaningfully translating silences. And I was wondering what the challenge is when women are anything but silent in their writing.
You know, maybe I'll just respond to you quickly, Satish, and then I don't think we should be seeing writing in terms of opposites of presence and absence. You know what I mean? So even when people are saying a lot, there is a lot they are not saying. And I don't know, and I'm not saying that that is only peculiar to women's writing, but it is certainly peculiar to a particular kind of gendered life in a regulatory society, right? So that you're saying it and not saying it, right? So I'm not sure if it is a matter of presence or of absence. But this also then ties up with the question you were asking while you were looking there, but I think you were asking here. I think that, you know, one is that writers themselves also translate, right? Just as translators write. So this idea of actually inhabiting another life, another time, another era, another class, there is a certain amount of migration involved. And I think it is really finally a question of which of us can travel. Which of us is not carrying such a heaviness of the self that you are able to travel somewhat lightly to that other space, to that other life. And very often that has to do with, if you are extremely upper caste, male, privileged, you will have that much of a more baggage, which will not help you travel that much, which will make that journey more difficult because there's likely to be more self-absorption about what you are dealing with. So I think that's a question that we can only judge contextually from work to work, whether that has to do with so-called original writing or it has to do with translation. There were a couple of other questions. Okay, 2, and shall we just say 3 here and then we can, yes, please go ahead. Where? Achha, sorry. Okay, 4 then. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. My question was about binaries. How does women translating women challenge or reconstruct these traditional binaries that we have in translation? For example, these dichotomies between a faithful woman and unfaithful woman, a free woman and a caged woman, because women are never fully agential or victimized subjects. And then in this process of translation, how does that lead to a more fluid and feminist understanding of text? I had one more question. Can I? It's similar to the questions that were asked before, tracing feminist consciousness across generations. So when you're translating, how do you make sure that you're not excessively modernizing, nor freezing these subjects when talking about historically feminist vocabulary or feminist concepts? Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic question. Does anyone want to respond? Urvashi, do you feel that way? No.
I think I'll say
Okay, yeah.
We can talk later.
Yeah, I think I'll just respond quickly because I think your question, very much like Aditya's earlier, requires I believe that a certain historical flattening out is not acceptable to me. So sometimes, even if something actually offends my feminist senses, I think that is a judgment you make sometimes to say, okay, what do I want to do here? It does bother me, but do I want to flatten out the historicity of where it is located? And I have often made a judgment of not hijacking the historicity of it. Because I think it's important to see that gender is also, it has a contextual life, that it does mean different things at different times, and you might sometimes find a slur word that is being used as endearment, but you might find sometimes an endearment that is terribly condescending. Right? So what are you going to do? I think these are questions that feminist thinkers have struggled with, and they ask very often, is there a feminist translation, right? So there is a lot that is being written, but I think in the South Asian context, this is a very important gesture. More needs to be written on this, because in the South Asian context, these questions are also tied with many questions that came up in the panel, which have to do with a more multilingual family, or which have to do with caste and class and questions like that. So we won't have the time to go into it, but great question. Thank you so much. Yes, yeah, please.
As a translator myself, I think this has been quite a very nice discussion, because the basic thing is, and I think what's come out also is that the sensitivity that you need to understand an author is what is crucial, and I think that it ties up with some of the questions on language as well, that it's not just words, so you can use tools of course, but it's understanding what the writer is saying and how women would relate to what that writer is saying and being able to bring it across. I think that is crucial, but my actual question was talking about language, and I also don't think English is that is in India, you know, publications that are published for India, you can assume that the audience is familiar with certain words which you can use from local languages. So these publications, are they intended for international market? Because then your translations would perforce be a little different, or not? That's one of the questions I have.
I don't think that would.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I don't think that the translations need to be different for an international market. I think certainly we don't think that, and we don't publish in such a way, and I wouldn't make them any different for the international market. And if the words you're talking about, when you say would be familiar to an Indian audience, actually we're talking about so many languages that words in one language would not be familiar to an audience within India within another language. You know, we are thinking, I mean, here if we break into Hindi and say, okay, some words which half the people in this room may not understand because they may be Tamil or they may be something else. So in a sense, what we see as Indian words are very specific. There is no such, I know you're shaking your head as if I'm getting you wrong.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
I'm not talking about words, it's not words, it's we all as Indians understand certain things, which, you know, it's like,
yeah, but we all as readers understood 100 Years of Solitude, even though it came out from a different culture, and nobody needed to rework it for an international audience. The work has to travel, and it has to be accepted in its own idiom and its own terms. I don't know, maybe a British publisher would see a translation from here as not adequate. That's their problem, really.
Okay, there were, can I go to her? If there are, I'll come back to you one second. Yes, please.
Thank you. I was thinking of how Rita ma'am talked of nuance of the gender translation when women translate women particularly, and thinking of particularly Ira ma'am, and this may be a question that as translators you get a lot, but I was thinking of how when you're translating something personal, like a memoir or an autobiography, and especially if it's of your mother, how objective, how do you navigate objectivity? And since you were talking about how translators need to be good editors, so how do you just navigate that space?
Yeah, this is very good.
Take care of the question as well.
Yeah, one sec. Is there, you had one, yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
So first of all, thank you to the panelists. It was such an enlightening session. So my question is slightly more intimate and personal because it comes from a context where I grew up in. So I come from the northeastern regions of India, very much wherein the languages of the hill people have been predominantly oral. and our histories are primarily archived through narrations, tellings, and tones. And these oral traditions are in itself very fluid, and they are not static. So I was thinking, when this translation comes into play, how does one translate something which is constantly evolving? So like if you could answer that, I would be really grateful.
Yeah, we'll certainly come to this very important question. Ira, can you briefly
Yes.
respond to her?
Your question was about how honestly can you translate somebody who you related to. In my case, my mother.
How
And
you navigate objectivity?
the thing is to erase yourself completely. You become a reader. That's how you translate, because you're reading a text, and at that point, you know, this is not your mother or your sister or your uncle or your aunt. You have to be completely true to and honest about whether there are warts and how you can. It's a tough thing. I felt that with my mother, particularly in 2-3 chapters where I talk about my parents' relationships, about my half sister, my eldest sister. These were all very tricky areas because we never spoke about them at home. You know, there was a kind of middle class propriety which snuffed it all out. I must say it helped that my mother was no longer alive when I did this book, and that my siblings were all very supportive. But I tried to be as honest as I could. The other thing is if you're writing about, let's say, my mother, if I was writing about my mother, you adopt the relationship of a child. That becomes the truest and most honest way of looking at somebody who you're very close to.
I think Astri would like to respond to the question on orality. Is that what?
Yeah, I was thinking of orality, and I was thinking about how when we translate I don't consider something as being the sort of final word, because things change. Translations, we have to constantly look at our work and then retranslate. I think classics, if it need to be translated like every 20 years or so, because our language changes, and so we should do that. And so in terms of orality as well, I just think that is something that if the language changes, then our translations change. I also don't believe that English is a flat language, because I think it's just our command that we should, always try to express things that are hard to think of straight off, but then your brain keeps on working at it and you get to it finally. I also would like to actually talk about artificial intelligence. And I would just like to say that I translate this Norwegian playwright called Jon Fosse, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. And his books are full of silence, and you've got to translate that silence, and it's very difficult. But I was trying to look at some of the things I was struggling with, and I used artificial intelligence to translate from Hindi to Bengali, just to see. And every time I used tu, it would be translated with apni. And this whole thing, and I tried to say, tui, tui, and it would just come in with apni, always. So that, to me, that shows you how it's a machine, it's not thinking.
Thanks so much. I know there might be more questions, and I know that we could do more justice to some of the fantastic questions you've asked, but you do know that there is a kind of a time period within which a panel needs to finish. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I'm going to ask my colleague, friend Nita, to step in now. And Nita has been at the helm of this project, leading it, following up on it, and playing an extremely important role. And it is only appropriate that at this point Nita should step in and say something.
So thank you so much. I think this conversation could have just gone on for the next hour, and we'd still be sitting here wrapped, because the questions coming up, and it could actually be a 2-hour session. But on behalf of the Ashoka Center and on behalf of Zubaan Books, I just want to thank all of you for being the most brilliant audience. And a special thank you to IIC for giving us this space to have these critical conversations. So, Tepe, if you're still here, it's a round of applause really to Team IIC. And you know, hats off to Urvashi, what you've done, and I think it's just consistently giving voice and giving, you know, women from across South Asia, making sure that they're heard loudly and clearly. I think that's something which really takes the kind of effort and the kind of strength and that, you know, jigra that, you know, you have, which, you know, so compliments to you. We're lucky to have a partner in you for these books. And to Team Zubaan, I think these books, if you could just hold up the covers again, you know, these covers by Nitya are just brilliant. So really thank you so much for issues here. Thank you, Nitya, for these beautiful covers. In fact, Astri is just coming back from the festival in Lahore, and she's had some really wonderful interactions with and with appreciations for the cover and for the translation. So, you know, it's been a joy to be working with this. And, you know, this whole thing would not have been possible without Sushamji's family, Rahul Bedi, Varun, I know Krupa and Varun will probably catch up, you know, with the video later. But thank you so much for, you know, really reposing your faith in us. And to friends like Rekha, who's here with us, she's just published a collection of short stories. Friends who've come here to celebrate Susham's life. Vinita is here. You know, it's just, it's lovely because all of you together give us the strength to do what we do. And I, you know, before I close, I have to thank our wonderful team at the Ashoka Center. Sanchit, who holds it all together, Fuzela, Sakshi, thank you for really, you know, the way everyone just puts it together. And the team at Zubaan, Momita and Melissa, are you here? I just want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You know, in fact, they're going to be outside of the bookstore, so it's a good idea as you're walking out of here, on your way to the lift, pick up a copy of one of these wonderful translations. Or all three, yeah, get a set. And, you know, we're looking forward to some wonderful books coming up over the next few months. So, this conversation is going to go on. So, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. The panel was just brilliant. Thank you for this, you know, incredible evening. I mean, I just got lost in the conversation till you woke me up and said I have to come back and say thank you. It's been brilliant. So get a copy of the book.
Have a great evening and thank you once again for being with us today. Bye.